Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be checking out Star Wars The Battle of Jakku, Insurgency Rising, Issue 2 by Alex Segura, Leonard Kirk and Rachel Rosenberg. The Imperial remnants' goal of keeping the war going continues as the Acolytes of the Beyond target Luke Skywalker, who has just left his friends to track down something he needs on Pillio. Reyna, the Acolyte we were introduced to last issue, is tasked by Yupi Tashu to keep an eye on Moff Adelhard and keep aiding him, as a new group of Acolytes, led by a woman named Howzell, is to deal with Luke themselves. Instead of the book mentioning Pillio, we're kind of signposting where we are after Return of the Jedi, and this was the location that Luke went to in Battlefront 2 and where you get to play as him as in Battlefront 2, where he aided Inferno Squad member Del Meeko against some indigenous monsters to clear out the Emperor's vault there. The issue also shows us the beginnings of Operation Cinder, something else we saw in the Battlefront 2 game, as well as the Shattered Empire storyline in the comics from 2015. For those who might not know, Operation Cinder is the Empire's contingencies in case they were beaten back, and how the Empire's creepy robot messengers in red all delivered their orders to high-ranking officers, and we get to see some of that in this issue as we get to see Grand Admiral Ray Sloane, a pretty big character in the first few books of this new canon, and a character who has very much intrigued me, and I really wish we'd gotten a lot more of her than what we have already. Sloane reports to an unseen Grand Admiral, telling him of a galaxy-wide bombing of various key worlds, which is Operation Cinder, and the Moff only wishes to deal with Adelhard, knowing that the Acolytes are seeing to him. And it's really interesting to see, even now, like with the Empire just in shattered ruins, and they're still trying to like get one up on each other. And I like how we're seeing how the rest of the Empire, what's left of the Empire, are viewing Adelhard, and how he's huffing that copium, hoping that the Empire can still live on. You know, he wants the good old days to come back, but that's not going to happen, and people like Sloane and this Moff are moving on to what is next. There's also that air of like fucking each other over that's still present within the Empire here, where each is trying to get more power than the other and trying to take over each other, and I imagine they're trying to just get a hold of his sector just because it's like an important sector, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see them come to blows later on in this series. Adelhard, meanwhile, is on the planet Darlan Boda, having found a group of rebels who survived his recent assault on their convoy. Adelhard gets really insane this issue. He has a great sort of like insanity rant here where the rebel pilots he captures just tell him the Empire is no more, the New Republic is now, and he just kind of like goes off the chain and gets real mad. He ends up killing one of them, demanding they tell him how this New Republic is here to stay and how the Empire was beaten, not wanting to accept that that is exactly what happens. And luckily, Lieutenant Elatia tells him to spare some rebels for interrogation. Elsewhere in the galaxy on Chandrila, Leia and Mon Mothma learn of what's going on in the Anoat sector, and this whole section of the book kind of reminds me of Heir to the Empire trilogy era Legends book, stuff written by Timothy Zahn back in that era, just steeped in all of this political intrigue and Leia and Mon fighting an uphill battle against an Imperial remnant and, you know, other people in the Republic who just don't want to deal with that sort of stuff and just kind of want to sweep it away or don't believe it. Stuff we've seen that in like The Mandalorian and the Ahsoka series, and it's something I don't understand why people don't like, because that stuff was just rife, especially through Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire stuff, the Thrawn trilogy stuff. It's just full of stuff like that in those books, and I think a lot of people have rose-tinted glasses when it comes to those books because they were full of political intrigue and stuff for Leia and Akbar and all of these characters to do that wasn't, you know, shoot guns and blow up stuff. And I really like that spirit has come over into this series, and Segura captures it so well. And it was something that was in the Aftermath books ever so briefly, as those Aftermath books jumped around with a lot of different characters. But I like that we have kind of a focused beam of it here in this series. Now, the two women learn from Agent Berens of Moff Adelhard's blockade in the Anoat sector, and what's really cool is Leia and Mon don't want to go in guns blazing with the rebel fleet. Instead, they want to send a small strike team in to just scout out and figure out what Adelhard is doing. Luckily, we know all about the team she's going to be sending in, as it's being led by Kes Dameron, father of Poe Dameron, who is the leader of the Rebellion's Pathfinder team, and a constant recurring character in Charles Soule's Star Wars ongoing. Kes puts together a team consisting of Rynn Zenat, the woman who survived Adelhard's attack on her convoy, Jarek Yeager, and Tharisia Allern, all skilled rebel operatives and pilots. Rynn being on the team obviously makes sense since she survived Adelhard's iron blockade, and her ordeal has left her feeling hopeless as the war never seems to end, and she doesn't really know why she's doing this because it's just going to lead to another battle and another uphill fight. And she gets a really cool small interaction as Luke is about to head off from Endor to go to Pillio, and he ends up talking with her a little bit, and I like that he imparts just this little bit of wisdom onto her where it's like, well, the Empire wants her to feel hopeless and wants them all to feel hopeless that there's a never-ending fight in front of them, because if that happens then they become, manageable and they won't fight back. And if they don't fight back, it means the fights they've already had were for nothing, as well as the fights that they will have. And that kind of like spurs her on to accept the mission and go with the other Pathfinders. And then Luke also gets a little bit of wisdom from her as she tells him that he's the only one who knows the questions he needs answered, so he needs to go and find them himself. He can't look to, sacred Jedi texts or Yoda or, his sister or anything. He knows them, he needs to go and find them himself, and that's why he goes off to Pillio and all of that. This is a really fun interaction because it's just a casual conversation. Rynn treats Luke like just a normal guy. She knows he was just, a guy who flew around in an X-Wing before he became a Jedi, and it's really nice that he just gets just this casual conversation with her, as well as I think that a lot of people who interact with Luke kind of have that starstruck thing with him. He's the legendary Luke Skywalker, Jedi Knight, and they kind of revere him as almost like a god because he's got, superpowers almost. But yeah, it's just nice seeing him finally get just like a casual conversation with a fellow rebel. As Luke and Rynn depart on their separate missions, Bib Fortuna, who was taken over in the wake of Jabba's death, holds an audience with Zeva Bliss on Tatooine. Now, Zeva is an interesting character because she's the leader of the Spice Runners of Kijimi, and I believe the mother of Zori Bliss, the character no one absolutely remembers from Rise of Skywalker, that they kind of added into the movie to help imply that Poe was not gay for Finn. It was a weird character to have in that movie and never really expanded upon anywhere else. And cool design, it was a cool design, but we never really got anything more of her outside of a few short stories and no real focus on her. So it's interesting, we're kind of pulling things back and kind of building that now here with Zeva, her mother, who's the leader of these Spice Runners. And she has come to Bib with a proposition. She wants him to join her as they side with Adelhard in the Anoat system, and hopefully that'll make things easier for them as Spice Runners, and Adelhard will see them as allies and not something that is a threat to him, and just kind of leave them alone. She's trying to get ahead of the curve, basically. And she is kind of laughed out of the palace by Bib, who doesn't want anything to do with that. And I like that we actually get to see a little bit of Bib's rule here. It's very brief, but he's very like posturing and, full of himself, thinks he's, the top dog, when everyone around him knows that is not the case at all. And he's just kind of like keeping the chair warm, basically. And of course, we know how that all goes as Boba Fett ends up killing him and taking the throne. So he and his men laugh Zeva out of the palace, and Zeva and her people kind of expected this, or at least Zeva did, as she hoped that they wouldn't go for it, as it will help foment chaos in the underworld, and it's something that they can use to consolidate power and kind of take over everything. And Zeva says all of this in the earshot of one of Bib's guards, so the guard will then go and tell Bib, and again sow that chaos. I really quite like that. I think that's a really cool idea, kind of pitting all of these different underworld elements against each other and getting them involved in something bigger than just, petty drug running. Luke meanwhile finishes up on Pillio and gathers the compass from the Empire's vault as he's confronted by the Acolytes of the Beyond, who want the compass for themselves. Luke fights them, and in true Jedi fashion, he doesn't actually kill or injure any of the cult members, barely actually even touching them besides disarming them of their weapons and then using the Force to cause them to like fall into each other or run into each other or wound each other with their blasters. Eventually one, a red-headed woman, taunts Luke about Vader and Palpatine and how the dark side will soon overtake them all before escaping with her life. I really like how the series is taking things we saw in Battlefront 2, the Aftermath books, and expanding on them like the Acolytes and giving Luke a cool mystery to investigate, and one that will bring him back round to Adelhard since the Acolytes are obviously part of his story as well. So it's kind of all coming together, and like I said, this feels like a total Zahn era Legends storytelling book. You know, it's all the characters are separated doing their seemingly own thing, and then in the third act it's all going to come back round together, as it did in those Heir to the Empire book. Out near the Anoat sector, meanwhile, Kes and his team get ready to begin their mission, and I love that Kes has been doing this for so long with Leia and been seen in like the Charles Soule ongoing book that he knows just a simple scouting mission is never just a simple scouting mission, especially when it's done on the orders of Princess Leia, and soon he's proven right when Zava Bliss and her underworld consortium surround Kes's ship. Now this is an interesting development since it implies that the Bliss and Dameron families are going to be a little bit more tied together than just Zori and Poe knowing each other in 30 years. This is going to make an interesting thing to follow through these 12 issues, like do these two families actually get together in some respect, you know, like they become friends of one another? Is Kes's team going to help Zava, you know, infiltrate Zava's team to get into the Empire's inner sanctum in Anoat, or is he going to convince Zava and her people to turn on Adelhard? It's very interesting to see where this story goes, and it's full of characters that I've followed through all of Charles Soule's run, so it feels very rewarding for me to be able to see where these characters go next. Insurgency Rising issue 2 continues to chug along at a nice pace with a second issue that really feels like an early Legends novel. It's got a bit of action, lots of political intrigue, and some new and interesting concepts thrown in to make for a really fun read. I can't wait to see where the story goes in the next issue. I'm going to give this issue a 9 out of 10.